the Digital Divide by Sarah, Shannon, Elena, and Amy. In an article titled How to Rethink the Digital Divide, Bill Thompson writes about the worldwide digital divide and the small steps that are being taken to fix the problem. In an organization known as EPSRC is willing to provide $1 million in funds for one proposal developed so technologists, engineers, sociologists, and ethnographers have all been collaborating different ideas. The main goal of the people involved in this proposal was to come up with a proposal for EPSRC that would ensure that everyone has fair access to the necessities of life in a networked world and to overcome social exclusion that is due to technological shortcomings. There are many reasons why developing a proposal to fix the digital divide has not been easy. First, the access and availability of technology is complex, and simple solutions will not fix the problem. Secondly, programs like One Laptop Per Child wants to provide low-cost laptops for children, but this program may be ineffective if there is no way to access the Internet. Third, Americans are currently unconcerned with the digital divide issue and continue to focus technological advances to faster devices and new software. To help less fortunate countries, America would need to put their materialistic ideas aside and look at the deeper issues. Although only one proposal will be awarded funding, all participants can be committed for bringing up this complex issue. Just by getting the ideas flowing, even if they don't get funding right away, all will be beneficial to the digital divide in the long run. Another issue to think about is the digital divide going on in our own country. In an article titled The Digital Divide and K-12 Student Computer Use, authors James Morgan and Craig Van Lagen discuss the differences in computer access and availability in our own country. Studies conducted by the National Telecommunications Information Association showed that in the 1990s, computer use was limited to those who could afford it. By 2001, there was a substantial increase in computer and Internet use as the nation was now online. Demographic differences were related to ethnicity, income, education, and location, such as faster Internet being less common in rural areas. By the fall of 2002, 99% of public schools had Internet access, and 92% of those schools had classrooms that had access to the Internet. Of that 99%, only 14.2% of Internet users did not have access to the Internet at home, which means they were using the Internet at work, school, the library, or a friend's house. Overall computer use is about 90% from kindergarten through high school. To remove this divide of technology in our country, all students need an equal opportunity to learn the computer skills whether they are in low-income areas or not. There are many benefits of having computers in the classroom, and the use of them in the classroom is changing the way we educate. Before, education was a lot of memorizing. Now with computers and the Internet, we can use a higher order of thinking by having students search for the answers on the computer. Drill and practice software helps show improvements in areas of math, reading, and writing. However, if students are more advanced than the software, then critical thinking activities are great on the computer and Internet. A survey found that 81% of teachers feel that using computers enhances students' academic performance, and 62% of teachers believe they help with standardized tests. It is difficult for teachers to use computers as often as they would like in their classrooms because they often have more students than computers. Students and families of higher economic status and education were more likely to use their home computers for educational purposes. Studies found that 85% of public elementary students use their home computer for education. It is said that families of higher income and education, no matter what ethnicity they are, tend to have a home computer for their children to use. Hopefully someday we can bridge the gap between high and low income families so that the low income families can have the computer too, and the digital divide will begin to disappear. Statistics show that girls use the computer outside of school slightly more than boys do. However, earlier in education, it is common for both boys and girls to use the computer about the same amount. The older the students in school, the more often they had to use the computer, and the more often the computers were used for critical thinking. At the younger ages, students were doing more drill and practice activities on the computer than those of older students. Nowadays, the Internet is overflowing with endless amounts of information. More and more companies are using the internet to sell products, and politics are using the internet to get support. Some towns are even talking about having e-voting. However, this can't be possible unless every person in that town has a computer. You no longer even have to go to the doctor when you think something minor is wrong. You are able to look up symptoms and remedies on the internet. The internet has recently become part of everyday life. Some jobs revolve around computer technology. Granted, these jobs tend to pay more, they are starting to pop up in many different industries. The digital divide needs to end so that everyone has equal opportunities to jobs that include technology use. The purpose of the Digital Divide study was to examine the factors that influence students' usage of computers outside of the classroom. It is hypothesized that computer use in school increases the use of computers outside of school. The rate of non-school computer use by students can be grouped into three main types: ethnic minorities, residents of remote rural locations or central cities, and households with lower income levels. These three groups tend to have lower non-school computer usage. Studies found that adults of higher education who used a computer at work were more likely to teach their children computer skills and encourage them to use computers outside of the school. The Digital Divide study consisted of 22,000 students in grades K through 12, ages 6 through 18. The study did not include students younger than 18 in college. The independent variables of the study were race, parents' income level, education level, and job. The dependent variable were the students' use of computers anywhere but school during school hours. So if a child uses a friend's computer after school, they are counted as having access to internet outside of school. Also a factor in the data set was the location in which the student lived, for example, a rural area, city, Midwest, South, etc. Statistics showed that students living in the northeast region of our country and the suburbs with parents of white descent, higher education, and income were more likely to own a computer at home that their children used outside of school. On the other hand, ethnic students living in the South rural areas who are of African American, Native American, and white Hispanic descent were 20 to 25% less likely to own a computer or access the internet outside of school. The very high probability user is a white female student who lives in the Northeast in a household with an income of over $75,000. In addition, adults in this student's household hold a graduate degree, use a computer at work, and work in an industry where 80% of workers use a computer. This student also uses a computer at school. In contrast, the very low probability user is a black male student living in the South in a household with less than $15,000 in income, containing no adults with more than a high school education, and no one who uses a computer at work or works in an industry where computers are used. In addition, this student does not use a computer at school. In conclusion, as the researchers had expected, the hypothesis was correct. Students who used computers in school were more likely to use them outside of school. Also, the more education the child's parents had usually meant the parents had jobs of higher income and therefore could afford to own a computer. Ethnic background was also a factor in families owning a computer. We need to consider all this information when trying to bridge the digital divide in our country and other countries around the world.